Lester Lee Frazier was born on March 22, 1917 in Mattoon, Illinois. His parents were Effie and Luther Frazier. Lester had one older brother, Ernie, and one younger brother, Jimmy. As a child, he survived the devastating tornado in Mattoon in 1921. The house fell on him, but luckily he had gotten under a table and no one in his family was hurt. In 1937, he married Sedona Ann Teresa Zahner, and they moved to Philadelphia to start a family. They had their first son, and my grandpa, Lester Eugene Frazier, or as most people call him, L.E. They also had another son, Bob, and a third who was born after the war named Steve. L.E. was born prematurely on February 5, 1938. To make him healthy, Sedona and Lester Frazier put him in the oven and fed him little bits of whiskey. April Frazier said, "The oven must have acted like a modern incubator would have." While living in Philadelphia, Lester worked on the New York Central Railroad. Many railroad workers like Lester had deferments from the draft because they were vital to the economy and their job was helping the war here. Having a deferment meant that you would not be drafted into the war. However, Lester got into an argument with the foreman, or the person he worked under, and his boss pulled the deferment. The grandparents of my grandpa were from Alsace-Lorraine, a territory that mostly spoke German but was a part of France after World War I. My grandpa remembers going over to their house and hearing them listen to Hitler on the radio because they spoke German. He said he was never really sure if they were for or against him, but he thinks and hopes that they were against him. After Pearl Harbor, and when my grandpa was 4 or 5, Lester was drafted into the Navy. Lester was paid about $45 a month as compared to $6 or $7 a week working on the railroad. He served on the destroyer Escort. Ellie recalls Lester telling him about his experiences in Europe. He said that when they would pull into the water of a place that the Allies had just gone through, there would be so many bodies floating in the water that they would just give the crew rifles and they would shoot the bodies so that they would sink. My great-grandpa never mentioned if they were German or American, but my grandpa doesn't think that they were American because he said they might have tried to recover them if they were. He was also assigned as a guard for German prisoners of war. While escorting them, he would aboard a train to take them to their next destination, and he would have his revolver loaded. However, my grandpa said that when he stopped to visit his family, he would never load his gun. On the train, my great-grandpa would handcuff the prisoner to the seat and go in the back and fall asleep. In 1945, Lester escorted President Roosevelt to the Yalta Conference. Here, Roosevelt met with Stalin and Churchill to discuss what to do when the war ended. This was a very influential meeting where the leaders signed the Declaration of Liberated Europe. USSR's failure to follow the rules set here caused tension that eventually led to the Cold War. During the war, my grandpa Ellie was in elementary school in Philly. He said that the war really drained manpower. He also remembers the telegram guy who brought around telegrams to people saying that someone in their family had died in the war. He said, quote, "That would have been the worst job in the world, I think," end quote. He also remembers the many different fundraising efforts for the war. There were drives to pick up pots and pans because they were running out of metal. He would gather all of the old metal and take them to the place that they were collecting them to drop them off. He remembers the food rationing, paper drives, and bond drives. He also remembers the gas rationing. They would get tickets for how much gas they could use per week. When the war was over, my grandpa remembers that there was a huge parade in Philadelphia. My great-grandpa returned and they moved to Springfield, Illinois, and later to Plainfield, Indiana. Later on, Ellie followed in his dad's footsteps and joined the Navy. Ellie was lucky enough to not have to go to war, but he still had many of his own experiences in the military.